You can say that Massachusetts was settled by people who had trouble getting along in England. Connecticut and Rhode Island were settled by people who had trouble getting along in Massachusetts, and Vermont was settled by people who had trouble getting along in Connecticut. And now it's inhabited by people who always have a certain amount of trouble getting along with each other.
All his life, Keith Jennison has lived in, loved, and written about Vermont. Throughout a distinguished career as journalist, war correspondent, and as friend and editor to such writers as Hemingway, Kerouac, Bellow, Sandburg, and John Steinbeck, Keith has remained a Vermonter. His books have made the wit and wisdom of the rural Northeast well known throughout the country.
Keeping track of Vermont stories has been a lifelong hobby of mine. I can remember one winter when I was home for Christmas vacation near Swanton, and we went up to cut ice in the dam, above the dam in Highgate Falls. And I went into Stockwell and Steele Country Store up there, and I heard the stories then, a lot of them. I also remember the smell of the store and the way it looked, the smell of the wet wool and the smell of the tobacco from the tobacco chewers drying on the stove. I don't know where the stories come from, and I don't know how they all got to me. But one that I love could have come from a scene like this, which would have been an elderly man sitting here on his doorstep, and a visitor stopping and looking, coming down and looking around and saying, "Nice little place you've got here. Lived here all your life?" And the man's head would come up slowly, and he would look at him and say, "Not yet." A lot of visitors to Vermont get lost and confused on the back roads of the state, and we don't really blame them because we do too. Take the crossroad back there. That's the basis of a very short conversation, and went like this. The man stopped at the crossroad because there was a farmer standing there, and he said, "Does it make any difference which one of these roads I take to go to Albany?" And the man looked at him and said, "Not to me it don't." The Texan in the white Cadillac convertible stopped to let a farmer have his cows cross from the meadow side of the road to the cow barn at milking time. And when the farmer passed in front of the car, he greeted him and said, "How big a place you got here?" And the farmer said, "Well," said, "over there on the meadow side," he said, "my land goes all the way up to them larches up there in the hill." And he said, "Over here on the barn side," he said, "the land goes right straight down to the brook where you see them alders growing down there." The Texan said, "You know, I've got a spread in Texas." He said, "I can get in my truck after breakfast." He said, "I can drive all day without getting to a single one of my boundaries." And the Vermonter looked at him and said, "You know what?" He said, "I had a truck like that once." We can make fun about practically anything. Ourselves, the weather, the climate, the land. But Vermonters are really a clan. They're a clan of survivors. Now, the value system of a clan of survivors in Vermont is very simple. It's work. For instance, the greatest compliment you can pay a man who does work for you, say, is you do good work. And you can't say anything better to him than that. Because if he is good, that's all he wants to know, that you understand that he does good work. Churches really dominate a lot of Vermont landscapes, and certainly a lot of Vermont towns and villages. One preacher new to Vermont was asked one day why his congregation didn't sing more hymns. And he said, well, I'm not sure, I said, but I think it's because they try to read each line to see if they agree with it before they'll sing it. Another long and very moving, sad sermon affected the Vermont congregation so much that by the time the minister got through, the whole congregation was in tears, except one man. And after the service was over, someone asked this new man, whom they didn't know, how he could sit through a sermon, this great sermon, and remain so completely unaffected by it. And he looked at them and said, I belong to another parish. There are a lot of other generalities about Vermonters that I object to. One is that they're tightwads. They're not tightwads, they're just broke. Very few fortunes have been made in Vermont, and most of the people who made them moved away, taking their family and their money with them. Also that Vermonters are hard to talk to. They're not hard to talk to. Most of them just don't like talking to somebody they haven't talked to before. So what we're really talking about is that sometimes it's hard to start a conversation with a Vermonter. There's an unwritten law in Vermont that the first time you meet somebody that you're acquainted with, your opening remark must be about the weather. It is expected of you to say something about the weather. Now this accomplishes two things. It sometimes gets you into some very interesting differences of opinion. It also relieves you of any responsibility to speak to the man the next time you see him. I mean, you've fulfilled to this person your social responsibilities for the day. Now, Castleton, Vermont, where I've been living for the last 10 years, has got a very wide main street. And they used to have a trolley on it that went into Rutland. And the street is so wide that you can stop and have a conversation with somebody in the middle of the road without disturbing whatever traffic there may be going past on either side. And one morning, after 4 of the most glorious August days anybody had ever seen, I met the retired postmaster on my way from the village store to the post office, and we stopped to exchange greetings. And observing the unwritten law, I said, Jimmy, kind of a nice day. And he thought it over for a minute and then looked up at me and said, yes, it is. for a town this size. In Vermont, there is a commitment to your neighbors. You may not like them, you may not want to see them all the time, you may not want to go to their house for dinner and eat with them, but they are your neighbors, and the commitment is part of the survival structure of our society. You know that if your house started burning in seconds or minutes, the neighbors would be there doing everything they could.